There's a critical difference between anger and contempt, and most people confuse them. Anger says, "What you did hurt me. That was wrong. I'm frustrated." Contempt says something entirely different. Contempt says, "You are beneath me. You disgust me. I'm better than you." Do you hear the difference? Anger is a response to a behavior. Contempt is a verdict about a person. It doesn't attack what someone did, it attacks who they are. Think about that for a moment. There's a reason Gottman describes contempt as communicating disgust, because neurologically and psychologically, that is exactly what it is. Research has shown that experience of being held in contempt activates the same brain regions as physical pain. Cruel words are not just words. They register in the brain the same way a blow does. What does contempt look like in practice? You probably already know some of these: eye rolling, sneering, heavy sighing paired with a dismissive wave, sarcasm, not playful banter, but sarcasm designed to cut, name calling, mocking a partner's opinion in front of others, speaking to a spouse in the tone you'd use to address someone you considered foolish. Some of you watching this right now are recognizing the look. You know exactly what I mean, because you've either been on the receiving end of it, or somewhere in the back of your mind, you know you've given it. Here's something Gottman found that is particularly stunning. Contempt doesn't just damage relationships, it damages health. Couples who harbor contempt for each other get sick more often. Their immune systems are measurably compromised. The stress physiology of being held in contempt or holding someone in contempt isn't just metaphorical, it's biological. Contempt is what happens when resentment stops being about what someone does and becomes about who they are. Which brings me to the most important question in this entire video. How does a loving relationship get there? I'm going to show you an exact pathway, step by step, that takes a couple from love to contempt. And as I do, you may recognize exactly where or someone you know that's on this path right now. I want to tell you about a couple I worked with in therapy. I've changed identifying details to protect their privacy. When they first came in to see me, they were both convinced that the problem was the other person. The husband felt his wife was constantly criticizing him, nitpicking, correcting, mothering him like he was a child. The wife felt her husband was rude and condescending, dismissive of her concerns and talking over her, treating her like her feelings didn't matter. And both of them, almost word for word, said some version of this: if they just stop doing what they're doing, then I would stop doing what I'm doing. Does that sound familiar? It's one of the most common things I hear in couples therapy. And it reveals something critically important about how contempt is built. Neither of them was entirely wrong about their partner's behavior, but both of them had made themselves passengers in their own relationship, waiting for the other person to change before they were willing to show up differently themselves. And in the meantime, they kept accumulating evidence. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every need that went unacknowledged. Just building a case. There's a metaphor I like to use with couples that I think captures this precisely. Imagine a mason jar, a clear glass jar sitting on the kitchen counter between you and your spouse. And every time a conflict arises that doesn't get fully resolved, you drop a stone in that jar. Every time a legitimate need gets dismissed without acknowledgement, another stone. Every time you swallow something that needs to be said, another stone. Every time sarcasm replaces honest vulnerability, another stone. For a while, the jar holds it. You can still see through it. There's still light in the relationship. But over months and years of unaddressed grievances, that jar fills up. And somewhere along the way, and this is the critical threshold, you stop thinking, my partner does harmful things, and you start thinking, my partner is a hurtful person. That shift from behavior to identity is the precise moment contempt is born. And here is what research confirms about how that jar gets filled. There are specific behaviors that are the primary contributors. The first is unresolved resentment, needs that were expressed, ignored, and then silently swallowed. When we stop bringing our hurts to the surface because we've learned it's not safe to, or because we've tried and nothing changed, those hurts don't disappear, they calcify. Resentment is just hurt that's hardened. The second is chronic emotional dismissal. You're being too sensitive. Here we go again. Why do you always make such a big deal out of everything? These phrases, spoken carelessly, perhaps repeatedly over years, do something devastating. They teach your partner that their inner world is wrong, that their feelings are a burden, that bringing themselves to you isn't safe. Your partner eventually stops bringing themselves, and connection becomes impossible. The third, and this is where I want to pause, is the refusal to take personal responsibility. This is something I observe in couples work consistently. When neither partner is willing to own their part, when every conflict devolves into the problem is you, rather than here's what I contributed, there's no pathway for grievance to ever be fully resolved. The jar keeps filling, it never drains. The Apostle Paul wrote in his letter to the Corinthians about love that keeps no record of wrongs, that is not naive sentimentality. That is sophisticated relational wisdom. Because a relationship where both partners keep meticulous records of every offense and neither is willing to acknowledge their own is a relationship building a case for contempt, whether it knows it or not. And the fourth pathway is perhaps the most insidious. Two partners who stop being curious about each other, who stop asking questions, who think they already know exactly who the other person is. And that knowledge has become unflattering. So here's the critical question. If contempt is built from specific behaviors over time, then it can also be prevented by specific behaviors over time. And the research on contempt prevention is genuinely one of the most hopeful bodies of work I've encountered in 20 years of studying psychology. Because it turns out that the marriages most resistant to contempt are not doing something complicated or dramatically different. They're doing a handful of very specific, very ordinary things consistently. Let me walk you through the most important ones. First, stay genuinely curious about your partner. Gottman calls this building love maps, the detailed living knowledge of your partner's inner world. Not just the surface facts, but their current fears, their evolving dreams, what's weighing on them right now, what they're quietly proud of. Here's why this matters so much as an inoculation. Contempt requires caricature. It requires a fixed, flattened image of a defective person. You can't hold a fully known, genuinely understood human being in contempt. The two states are neurologically incompatible. A couple that never stops asking curious questions, who never assumes they already know, has structurally removed one of contempt's primary conditions. You can't build a case against someone you are still genuinely trying to understand. Second, build a culture of appreciation and make it specific and daily. Gottman's research shows that what distinguishes marriages that thrive is not the absence of negative interactions, it's the consistent presence of positive ones. The ratio that matters is 5-1. For every negative exchange, you need 5 positive ones to maintain emotional health in the relationship. But here's the nuance: appreciation must be genuine and specific to land. You're great doesn't build that much. I watched how patient you were with the kids tonight when you were clearly exhausted. I want you to know I noticed that and I respect you for it. That lands totally differently. That requires that you've been paying attention, and paying attention is itself an act of love. The practice here is straightforward. Each day, find one real thing about your partner that you genuinely value and tell them. What this trains over time is not just the habit of expression, but the cognitive habit of scanning for good rather than bad. And that shift in what your brain is looking for is the direct neurological opposite of what contempt is built on. Third, turn toward bids of connection, even the small ones. This is one of Gottman's most important findings and one of the least discussed. Throughout any given day, your partner is constantly making what researchers call bids of connection. A bid is any small reach toward the other person. A comment about something they noticed, a touch on the shoulder, a sigh that's really a question. Look at this, about something in their phone. Gottman found that couples who stay happily married respond to these bids about 86% of the time. Couples who end up divorced about 33% of the time. That gap, built from thousands of tiny moments, is the difference between a relationship that feels safe and one that feels very lonely. You don't have to stop everything to respond to the bid. You just have to acknowledge it. Tell me more about that. I want to hear it. That's turning toward. Silence is turning away. The practice is simply developing awareness of when your partner's reaching and choosing to reach back. Fourth is to address grievances early and make sure both actually feel heard before closing the conversation. Remember that mason jar that I described? This is how you keep it from filling up. Every conflict that gets fully processed, where both people feel genuinely heard, and where at least partial responsibility is acknowledged, is a stone that never goes in the jar. Gottman recommends what he calls a gentle startup. Raise the concern in first-person language. Describe your feelings and your need, and aim it at the behavior, not the character. When you didn't acknowledge what I said at dinner, I felt invisible. I need to know my words matter to you. That's a door open for connection. You never listened to me. You never have, is a slammed door and the often overlooked half of conflict resolution. So before you move on from a difficult conversation, ask sincerely, do you feel understood? If the answer is no, the conversation is not over. That simple question is one of the most powerful repair tools in the research literature. Fifth, and this may be the most demanding one, take personal responsibility for your part every time, even when it's only 5%. In the New Testament account of the Sermon on the Mount, Christ taught his followers to first remove the beam from their own eye before attending to the splinter in their brother's. That's not just moral instruction, it's relational wisdom. That maps precisely onto what the research shows. The couple I described earlier, the one who spent over a year in therapy with very little progress, was stuck precisely here. Neither was willing to own their contribution, and so no conflict ever fully resolved. Every grievance stayed live. The jar kept filling. Here's what I know from clinical practice. When one partner genuinely, non-defensively acknowledges even a small part of their role in the conflict, it is physiologically disarming to the other person. Something softens. The nervous system settles, and suddenly connection becomes possible again in a way it wasn't a moment before. Responsibility is not weakness. In a marriage, it is one of the most powerful acts of love available to you. So let me land this with the most important reframe of anything I've shared today. I want to leave you with this. The research on contempt is sobering. It tells us that one emotion, if it takes root and goes unaddressed, can end a marriage with near certain reliability. But the research on what prevents it is genuinely hopeful, because the things that inoculate a marriage against contempt are not grand gestures or dramatic transformations. They're just small, consistent daily choices. The choice to stay curious about who your partner is becoming. The choice to say out loud what you appreciate. The choice to reach back when your partner reaches towards you. The choice to bring your hurts to the surface before they harden. And the choice, perhaps, the most important and the most difficult, to look at your own role honestly, even when every instinct tells you the problem is over there. There's an ancient Hebrew concept in the scriptures called chesed, often translated as loving kindness, but more accurately described as covenant loyalty, a committed, chosen daily orientation toward the good of the other, not contingent on how the other person is behaving today, not waiting to be earned. That is, I believe, what the research is actually describing when it names the habits of marriages that last. Not a feeling that either comes or it doesn't. A daily practice, a chosen orientation. If this video gave you something to think about, a moment of recognition maybe, an aha, maybe some hope, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me what landed. Tell me what you're going to try. That conversation matters to me. I have a free downloadable resource that goes with this video, a contempt prevention guide with the key principles and practical daily exercises drawn from the research we covered today. The link is in the description. Print it out. Work through it with your partner if you can. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. New deep dive videos every Saturday. If you want to go deeper on any of the research we talked about today, I'll be covering some other things in relationship to this in future videos that I'll link down in the description. I'm Andy, and thanks for being here. Take care of yourself and take care of those that you love.